Welcome back to the channel, folks. In today's video, we're going to be doing something a little different, driven by spur-of-the-moment inspiration I got from reading Jenette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. If you haven't read the book but want to, please ignore this video. Just run away, turn it off, shut it off, do whatever you need to do. Just don't. And either purchase her book or listen to her audiobook, which is available on Spotify, where I listen to it. The part of the book I want to review today is from part 72, where Jenette writes, "Tears fall down my cheeks while I drive home, trying desperately to process everything. Laura, her therapist, suggested that mom was abusive. My whole life, my entire existence has been oriented to the narrative that mom wants what's best for me, mom does what's best for me, mom knows what's best for me. Even in the past, when resentment started to creep in or wedges started to come between us, I have checked those resentments and wedges. I have curbed them so that I can move forward with this narrative intact, this narrative that feels essential to my survival." I really wanted to focus on this paragraph because I want to dissect it a bit, because what's being said here is often at the crux of many, not all, but many therapies that folks participate in. The most accurate analogy I can imagine fitting for this is the analogy that the person who grows up in a house that's constantly burning will end up believing that it's normal to constantly choke on smoke. Totally butchered that, but it's paraphrased. And this is often the hardest part of therapies that involves some level of either singular trauma or a series of traumas. They will end up wiring, and know my word choice here because it's not rewiring, it's just wiring the body to associate either specific or general actions to negative outcomes that would have otherwise not been there had it not been for that traumatic event. So let's talk socialization, for example. How many men do you know have been discouraged from expressing their emotions? Conservative media consistently has a field day with this, hedging their bets on misogyny to encourage men to place more distance between their emotional experiences and the act of expressing them. Because if they express them, they're either viewed as vulnerable to attack, gay, or feminine. All outcomes there we are, I should say, socialized to avoid. So we learn that in order to keep ourselves safe, we need to refrain from expressing ourselves for fear of negative consequences, outcomes, or proximity to identities we might not have otherwise identified with. On the subject of socialization, there's also nuance we can unpack with queer identified experiences. So much of the queer experience, including in 2024, is rooted in shame around our identities that we have messaged to us we need to hide in the best interest of our survival. Many of us become so accustomed to the idea of needing to hide aspects of ourselves that even after we come out, we still might struggle with being totally honest with ourselves, partners, friends, and family members. This is not to suggest that there's some kind of queer community conspiracy to deceive. It is to unpack that some of us don't always get the space to really acknowledge and recognize the severity of our experiences and the lasting impact they've had on us before trying to get on with our lives and wondering why we have some of the relational difficulties that we do. And I say both of these examples as a gay man who is consistently trying to create spaces to help folks understand their own experiences, while also still trying to wrestle with some of my own. So getting back to Jenette's quote about how difficult it was for her to accept this, at the time, novel idea that she was abused by her mother, the trajectory of her story isn't entirely unfamiliar. And one note of appreciation I really want to put out there for her is that she managed to put into words the visceral and gut-wrenching experience of needing to, in essence, burn the house down before attempting to build the kind of life she wanted for herself with a new foundation. And in many therapies, and I'm going to clarify again, not all therapies, but in many, this is the primary challenge. The challenge is to first identify what you want out of the process. Along the way, you identify your strengths, needs, and barriers that may interact with getting what you want. And lastly, you try to figure out which of those aforementioned barriers have been introduced by either family, friends, the world at large, or a combination of all three of those things. After these challenges are identified, the hard work starts in not just being able to cognitively admit that aspects of your life were traumatic and hard, but finding ways to retroactively hold people accountable, whether they be family, friends, or otherwise. Now, I don't mean going into a room and yelling at them. I mean being able to not only see the actions as they were, but also allowing ourselves space to react emotionally and authentically to these traumas. Reaction to them in such a way that deplatforms the people who've hurt us and instead recontextualizes our experiences to acknowledge that they made mistakes, that these were imperfect people who hurt us, that these were also likely people who themselves were hurting long before they decided to hurt us. And in many cases, that's what it means to heal. Now, I know when I say recontextualizing, some may hear that as excuse making for the people who have hurt us, and that's not the point nor the intent. The intent is to steer us away from this all or nothing, black or white thinking that often emerges from trauma and ultimately come to a place where nuance can survive the scrutiny of the lenses we've used more unforgivingly for ourselves in the past and more compassionately for ourselves in the present. And that's roughly what the aha moment in therapy feels like, whether it's like a sudden revelation, a gradual shift from thinking to feeling, or a new reality you step into slowly. The aha moment can often be incredibly painful for people coming to terms with just how traumatic experiences have shaped them. Much as people may want these moments, sometimes the implications of these moments themselves can be incredibly overwhelming and scary when clients get into a space to consider what they feel like they need to do in service of their recovery. So some of that work may be in the realm of creating and maintaining emotional boundaries, limiting interaction with specific groups or people, challenging ourselves to behave differently in certain situations. The list goes on. None of that work is easy, but in the very least, to those who've, for those who've done it, I consistently hear that it's been worth it when considering their long-term happiness. So maybe impulsively and reeling from the very relatable revelations that this book kind of just delves into, I wish that anyone considering therapy who is also attempting to recover from trauma, go ahead and check it out, if only because, in my opinion, it takes a very necessary long road to some incredibly insightful places. On that note, I hope that hearing these thoughts somehow just agitates just enough to help you consider how trauma recovery can work for yourself or others. And if you've gotten some usage or some utility from this video, please feel free to consider liking and subscribing. This way you don't miss any of our content updates. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll be back soon. Take care.